this is Dan Henk, and welcome to another edition of the Skull Sessions. And today, my guest is John Remick. Is that correct?
That's called me Jack. My mother named me Jack, so I'm Jack Remick. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we started having a great conversation, and then at some point, it was like, we need to start recording this. Like, so
Well,
let's delve back into that for a minute. Like, we were talking about like whether you write for yourself or you write, for an audience, and what you define as success, and so on.
so I was my question is, I keep running into this. Look, you write a book and, people read it and they reviews or stuff like that. And then it disappears. I think they say the shelf life is about 3 months for a book, and after that it's gone because everybody wants kind of the next shiny thing. You were talking about conformity in Europe, and aren't we kind of doing the same thing with our writers, just sort of tossing them aside after they pop that one book out of the bottle? I can't keep up. I can't, as a writer, well, let me back at it this way. In the old days, you probably don't remember this, but they say spend 75% of your time writing and 25% promoting. I think it's flipped now. You have to spend
That's true.
25%,
You're probably right.
25%
Yeah.
writing and 75% promoting, and
We
so
have a
people,
lot more social media now. So like people are like, oh, I gotta get myself on Instagram and on TikTok and on Facebook and on Twitter. And like you never had that back in the day.
and so you just keep pumping stuff out instead of, attending to your writing. I kind of like the old days of kind of the hermetic writer sort of sealed up in his attic, sort of writing books just for the fun. No, you know what I mean, staying out of the mainstream. So let me show you one thing, Dan, that your art, when I check the YouTube, your art and your body art just fascinates the hell out of me. Uh, my last book is called Man Alone. I don't know if you can see it, but
Yeah.
that cover image is done by an artist in New Jersey. His name is Russ Spitkovsky,
Okay.
and he takes art the same way you do. How deep can you go to get what you want and what comes out? And that phrase on your website or on the YouTube thing that Rod Serling says that you have to use the key to unlock your imagination. This image does not occur in my book. It doesn't occur in the book at all, but it's so powerful.
Do
You
you
know,
think it kind of like summarizes the iconography of the scene, like
yeah,
what's going on without like visualizing a specific element?
yeah. Well, earlier you mentioned, uh, uh, you said an illustrated novel or something. You said like that, pictures in it. It turns out the illustration is not very interesting, but an artist interpretation of the writing is really powerful. And that's what I see in your work, is you're taking an image, but you're giving it something deeper, something coming from deep in place, someplace in you, and that it has to satisfy something in you or you don't put it out. That's what I'm seeing anyway. You know,
Yeah, well, thank you. I always like because I've read like I don't know thousands and thousands of books, and I get a lot of them from the library, so they're kind of like older books, and like some of the older books would have like illustrations of them, like a lot of like the pulp magazines were like collected into novels and stuff, like The Shadow or Doc Savage and stuff like that. But they'd have like text and then illustration, then text, then illustration,
right?
and a lot of those illustrations they weren't that great, but they made you think the potential was there. So it's like, and then like I looked at like some of like the better comic books like by Steve Totleben, and like just the artistry was there and it really
Yeah,
captured the imagination. It was like, so you could combine that artistry with like the strength of the story that would both would complement each other.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think that's the idea. If it's just an illustration, then it's just a drawing that you recognize. But if the artist is bringing something from, I want to say, him or herself into it, then you get a transformation of the words into a different image than maybe even the writer was thinking about. Because
Right.
this image here on uh, this book, I there's a place in here where there's some words that, okay, uh, yeah, well, anyway, that's beside the point. But Russ saw the words, and he took a part of that phrase of the words. It was something like he the mattress had a sway back in it, and it swallowed him up and opened like a tulip opening in sunlight, or closing in the dark. And he turned it into this dark image, because here's the guy in the bed in the mattress, you see, but then he
Right.
turns it into this dark thing. So he goes beyond the words and brings out this image that is just, it's totally, it's not an illustration, Dan. It's a powerful explosion of his unconscious mind into the words and beyond. It's just a creative act that I just adore. I just love it.
I think that's the strength of like good illustrations is it like they take you above and beyond what you'd imagine. Because when you read that scenario to me, like I picture one thing, but then I didn't do a deep dive into it, which obviously the artist did. And I
Mhm.
think the best artists they like look at something, you know, how can I express this in a way that's really different and dramatic and really grabs you,
Yeah,
and that's what he did. So
yeah,
instead of you just like kind of passively going over it, you're like, wait a minute, that's really intense.
yeah, yeah. I think that's the intensity is what we're looking for. That's what I want anyway. Which brings me to a question. I keep hearing this. Oh, we're in a post-literate culture, a post-literate time. People are not going to read books anymore. Well, I can't buy that. Maybe they don't read books, but they're sure not going to quit looking at images. You know what I mean? If if you write a story and it can be made into a moving picture, I think that's just a continuation of the progress of art through time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, stories have been around forever. I mean, when they're told like, via like the old man at the campfire, telling all like the members of the tribe, whatever, whether it's written down, it could be written down in cuneiform, it could be written down in Latin, it could be written down in English, but it's like the story still exists and still survives.
Okay. Well, but let me ask you this question another way. You're a multifaceted artist, all right? I imagine I know you're a painter too, as well as a tattoo artist and a novelist and a writer. Do you see a time when words will be passé?
Not necessarily. I mean, one thing that's been brought up a lot is like people are talking about AI and
Yeah.
like AI doing like artwork or writing stories, and like they're saying that like if AI keeps on its current course, you could have like you'd basically have like the next Stephen King or Harry Potter story or whatever. It would be as well written as if the author had written it, maybe even better, but it would be done by computers. I don't necessarily think that's the case because here's the thing: it's like taking this back to artwork. Like if you look at somebody when and you see this all the time, people will replicate like one of the old masters. It's
Mhm.
like yeah, if they look at the picture, they can completely perfectly replicate it, but they didn't have the inspiration to create it in the first place. And so there's like a little hint of like technique. There's a little hint of like what motivates them, what they like better, what they like less, like within the texture, within what they choose to highlight, what they choose to contrast. So all that stuff, like you would basically have to program a computer with like a whole bunch of extra learning, and then when you give it a whole bunch of extra learning, then it still is not going to have the exact same inputs that that artist had. So
Right.
I don't think that that's really. I don't think it's the word anytime soon.
Okay. Well, another question then that's been bothering me for quite a while here. Do you think that writing can ever go to this level of abstraction that modern art has gotten to? I mean, abstract expression, is there such a thing in writing as abstract expressionism? I mean,
Well, I don't know, but like I said, I've read a lot, so I remember like the William Burroughs inspired cut up books.
oh
Where
yeah,
like he would like write something on a page and then like cut it all up and toss it around and
yep,
like pull it out. And I remember what was one of his novels, City of the Red Sun, and I
Hmm.
was reading it, and like the first half of it is this great story because he's a really good
Hmm.
writer, and the second half of it is all his like I call it his cut of garbage because
Hmm.
it's just like unreadable mishmash. It's like it was such a great story and you ruined it. So I think people have done that before and it hasn't proven very successful. The things
Yeah.
that do prove the most successful are kind of like the iconic, like even when like if you look at like Star Wars, like the when George Lucas crafted it, he looked at a bunch of like older tales and myths and so on and created it kind of out of that. So the whole story is like loosely based on a lot of stuff that already existed, but he couldn't have based that on cut books. He would have had to base it on
Right.
strong stories.
Yeah. So I think that what we're both saying is the same thing, is that AI will never replace the creative power of the human unconscious. I mean, that's where all that good stuff comes from, a dream or whatever you want to call it. It just boils out of you. You write and it comes out. And I don't think that words will ever be obsolete. I don't think story will ever be obsolete. I think that as long as our brains work the way they work, they're going to want story that has at least some kind of flow to it. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, it doesn't have to be A, B, C, D, E, F, but it's got to have some kind of flow to it. I think that rhythm is what binds us to those things as much as the words themselves. I kind of always look.
I think
Go ahead.
that sorry to
Uh,
interrupt. I think kind of like the unique perspective of either an artist or a writer or whatever is such a butterfly effect of inputs, everything from what they ate in the morning to how they were raised to the environment they grew up in. Like it's so many complex little interactions that creates the person they are. The way that they visualize the world is different than anything else, doesn't have the exact same combination of experiences. So even if you have like an AI, like you have to make it so amazingly complex, and you also have to give it the exact same feed that that artist or that writer had to have the same output. So it would be very, very difficult.
yeah, I think that. Yeah, I read a book not too long ago by a guy named Eric Newman called Art and the Creative Unconscious. And he talks about stuff, the unconscious mind. I don't know. Do you even think there's an unconscious? Do we as writers have an unconscious mind? Or is it all logic and left brain and mathematics?
I think I even debate like it's kind of the Ben Harris question of like, are we actually self-aware beings, or is it like an incredibly complex, basically a butterfly effect where it makes us think that we're self-aware?
Hmm.
And I'm not sure. I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in a soul. So you know is there like some complex thing that's unique to each person? Is it just because we're almost like computers that have had, but we're so advanced, we've had so many inputs, it creates the way that we are. I don't know. You know, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, well, let me put another layer onto it then. I'm going to ask you the most embarrassing question you can ever ask a writer. Where do your ideas come from then? You say, I mean,
I don't know if that's the most embarrassing, but it is probably one of the most common ones. Um,
uh,
I don't know because like when I was a little kid, and I was always a little kid who like we didn't have social media back in those days. I'm old, so like I remember like we'd have all these worlds kind of going on in your head. We didn't have a TV until the seventh grade where my grandmother felt sorry for us and gave us her old barely working TV and stuff, and my parents limited us to 1 hour a day, so that wasn't really our input you know so like the whole like making everything up in your mind you know was kind of what you ran with for a long time. For a long time, I was like, well, when I start doing art or when I start doing writing, it's just going to be what I'm influenced by. It's not going to be me. But then
mhm.
I remember when I went to art school and I'd be like, painting or I'd be drawing stuff, and people were telling me, "Oh, I love your style." I'm like, "What style? I'm just drawing what I see." But it's like, you know, over time, just because of the way you interpret
But
stuff.
where do you see it, Dan? You say, I only write what I see or I paint what. Where do you see it? Do you see it in your brain, in your mind, on the wall? I mean, in a dream, in a where do you see what you see when you're writing what you see? That's the
Well,
third embarrassing question. I have another one in the
I
middle.
think it's all your inputs. I mean, I've been all around the world. Like,
Uh,
my parents were stationed in Germany for 3 years. I've lived everywhere. Florida. I lived in Texas. I lived, in New York, upstate New York, whatever. So I think it's like this massive inputs. Plus, I've read like probably a million books,
mhm.
so books and comics and movies and where I've lived, and like eventually it gets so complex
Yeah.
that you feel like you know where you're going.
Okay. Well, I want to ask the second embarrassing. I've asked the first and third embarrassing question. When you write, do you think before you write, or is the writing the thinking? I mean, I know that's
I think before I write.
okay.
I know different people, have a different approach. Like some people call themselves pantsers. They go by the
Hmm.
seat of their pants when they write.
Hmm.
I'm not like that. Like I need to like I kind of structure an outline like a important events. I might change stuff along the way, but I don't dramatically alter everything.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you think first and then write and then do the editing second.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you this. When I was teaching, people would ask me, why do I write? Why do you write, Jack? Why do you write? And I thought and I thought, and I finally came up with a sort of a stock answer. I write so I have something to rewrite. Well, why do you rewrite? Because the art is in the rewrite. The first time you get it out, it's there, sure.
It's
It's
very
there and
raw. It's very
it's
raw.
raw. It's raw.
Yeah.
So you got to realize there's another step or two steps or three steps here that turn words into art. I have a question about images on your body and how you tattoo. Is realism very important in the tattoo world? I see things that, man, they look like a flower, they look like a skull, they look like exact representations of what they are. You know, is is that sort of the way that tattoo art is going, or is it going to a more interpretive thing? Like you mentioned Burroughs and some of his work. Is there a link there? Am I trying to reaching too far?
I think no, no. It's like it's gone through a bunch of phases. Like the first phase for the longest time, they created a lot of the stereotypes, like it's all bikers or druggies or whatever. Was pretty much it was kind of like a lowbrow underground thing, and like if you were a sailor, like a
Yeah,
lot of people would like be based like Sailor Jerry is famous for this. He was like based in Honolulu, Hawaii, and he'd make his money when the sailors came home, and they have
right.
all this money that they've accrued over the 4 months they are to sea, and like they're going to spend it on liquor, hookers, and tattoos. So
Yeah.
he would just try and get them in and bang it out. So a lot of those for years and years, for decades, it was most of the tattoos were simpler designs that they could get done as quick as possible. And then when they kind of broke out of that boundary, and you had some of these like amazing artists like Guy Atchison, who went to art school and was doing like book covers, album covers, and they kind of like broke out, and people are like, wait, I can do anything. And I think that's right around, like right after they broke out is when they entered the field. And like I went to art school first, and I interviewed with the comic companies, and I ended up tattooing. And when I ended up tattooing, I was like, well, I paint in full color as realistic as possible. So why don't I just tattoo like that? And then I remember a lot of people were kind of starting to do that, and what you kind of learn over time is you learn if you do something super realistic, it just doesn't hold up. Because the way the
Okay.
tattoo stay in the skin is basically white blood cells, the swelled ink particles, but they're now too big to get out of the skin. So all tattoos are trapped white blood cells, but they're
Huh.
inside fluid, like it's intracellular fluids, so they move around. So all tattoos also blur a little bit over time, and
Wow.
they also fade a little bit over time because some of those white blood cells die, and when they leave, the tattoo gets a little bit lighter. So
Wow.
every single tattoo, I mean, is temporary. some might be temporary, like as in a couple decades, some might be temporary within like 2 years. Hopefully with the prices people pay for it, it's not 2 years, and they've learned over time how to refine it. So they've learned that what they need is like a stronger contrast and a little bit more illustrated approach. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
so
So,
that
well,
that's
that
kind of what people focus on now.
yeah, that reminds me of it's the first time I've ever heard tattooing discussed in a biological way. I mean, a physiological. That's brilliant. That is, but see, what happens in my mind is when a tattoo is as completely illustrative as a yakuza, the Japanese, body tattoo, does that also just disappear? In other words, is tattooing built fundamentally on that notion of the creative destructive polarity that to create is to destroy at the same time? So you're building in the destruction of the image at the same time you're
See, I
creating.
think I think you're diving too deep into it because
Okay,
tell you the
okay.
truth, like, and I will say, I mean, there's a whole bunch of variety in this. So, we could spend all day like talking about tattoo techniques because I've been tattooed 24 years, so I know way more than anybody who probably wants to know about the subject. But specifically the Japanese traditional tattoos, they're what are called hand poke tattoos.
Uh-huh.
So, they often have a bunch of needles on the end of a stick, and by tattooing like that, one, it tends to heal a little bit better because the machine with its like steady repetitive motion tends to chop up more of the skin.
Oh, okay, okay,
Also it deposits the ink a little bit deeper in the skin, so
okay,
that actually, the Japanese tattoos, the handbook ones, are some of the few tattoos that actually get brighter over time, like as
okay.
more ink emerges, and when they do the patterns, they also do them. It's like based on Japanese watercolor. Like a lot of people do them now because they're kind of popular. But what I consider authentic are the ones that are done, based off the Japanese culture. So the Japanese watercolor tattoos, like Jesse and Max are doing this. What they'll do is the contrast is higher, the saturation level is a little bit higher,
Mm,
so you get everything in there to make that tattoo last. So like the
okay.
members of the Yakuza and stuff. And by the way, like you still can't go to a public bathhouse and have visible tattoos
Right.
in
Yeah.
Japan
Yeah.
because they still associate with the mob. But
Yeah.
um those tattoos are made to hold up for decades.
Okay. So they're not building in the destruction or the vanishing of the tattoo. So it's a more permanent art, you know.
Right.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's fascinating. Again, I've never heard tattooing discussed as a physiological process. That's wonderful. Can I use that in my next book?
Of course, yeah. Well, if you got any tattoo questions, just shoot me an email. And like, if you have a character that's a tattoo artist, like I think kind of what sparked me to start writing was there was a guy who wrote a zombie book, and one of the main characters was a tattoo artist, and
Okay.
so he wanted to know if the portrayal of the tattoo artist was correct. So he got a hold of me, and it was a very poor portrayal. But I told him, and he altered it. So and then I was like, wait a minute, I'm working on the book. And then, it just went from there.
Well, that leads me to another question then. I hear a lot of people get tattoos and then regret it, and then they have it removed. Using the process that you've just described, it would be very, very difficult to remove a Japanese style hand poke tattoo, right? Because
It's
it's
hard
so
to,
deep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, like, laser tattoo removal is like basically an intense sunburn. And what sunburns do is they kill cells flush out, fresh ones come in, and if it's a tattoo, they lighten it up because like the cells hold ink.
Okay. So the idea here that when people want to remove their tattoo because it's done with a pen, a tattoo pen, I guess is what you call it, it would be easier
The
to
tattoo
remove.
machines, the ones we use now. Yeah.
Okay, so it would be easier to remove a, a regular tattoo rather than the hand poke one. Is that what we're
It'd be
saying?
easier to remove, and colors are also easier to remove than black and gray. So
Okay,
those
yeah.
ones like done in jail and prison and so on, those probably have like a longer lifespan.
Okay. Now in art, I mean, in writing, you get a second chance. You call it rewriting. In tattoo art, do you have a second chance? Is there a way that you can fix it?
Not as much. I mean, there are things you can do, but nothing like, all right, so if you rewrite something, the old thing is gone and the new thing replaces it. You
Right.
don't get that with tattooing. It's more like you've got to work with what's there,
Okay.
and see what you can cover up, what you can alter, but it's never as good if you start as if you start from scratch.
Okay.
Although I
Okay.
kind of feel like that with writing too. Like if you rewrite something, often it isn't as good as if you just started fresh and wrote the entire idea, the same idea, but without the previous story to like kind of like drag you into its pitfalls.
Yeah. 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 Well, let me ask you another question then about this. You went to art school. You must have studied painting and drawing and stuff like that. Have you thought about creating images for your own work, for your
Oh, I
writing
do.
work? You
Uh,
do. Oh, you
yeah,
do. Okay.
all of my novels have like originally I was gonna do like 30 something illustrations, but I do
Mm,
full page, what they call it in comic books, they call them splash pages, like when you do a full page illustration. And one of those, because I do very detailed images, takes me 3 days.
okay.
So originally I was gonna do like 30 per book, and then I kind of narrowed it down, so now I do about 9 per book. And I'm pretty happy with that.
Okay. So I keep using the word illustration, but when you make the image, do you use the words as a trigger or as a stimulus, or is it coming out of your head in another way? In other words, is the picture on the page not simply an illustration of the words, but in fact a different version of the story as an image?
Well, the way I write, I try to visualize everything as I'm doing it. So I already have kind of the way something looks. And what I'll do is like out of the entire, like say it's 300 pages. So, I will take like what I think are like really strong images and I want to bring them to life. And what I like best about like those old books with illustrations is like, you're having trouble picturing something, or maybe you're picturing it different than the writer would, and the illustration snaps you into his reality.
Okay.
And I kind of wanted to do that, like like kind of bring something to life for you, and like something that you like what you talked about with the cover for your book, like how that visual like creates something like way more complex in your mind than when you first hear the words that are connected to it. I kind of want to do the same thing. Like this should really pop. This should really grab you. This should really pull you in.
Well, that pushes me to ask another fifth embarrassing question. Can you ever actually, Giacometti, in some place I was reading, Giacometti, the sculptor, he said, you cannot draw that glass on the table. You draw the residue of an image of that glass. Okay. So now, when you get to this point, can you ever actually render in its purity and fullness the internal vision you have that you're trying to get onto the page? How would you know that you'd actually realized it in its fullness?
Well, I think first of all, I think that quote's a very accurate quote. I think I can see where he's going with that, and I definitely appreciate that perspective. And I think that when I try to bring something to life, like I might, as I'm bringing it to life, realize, hey, I should really put this into it or that into it. So it's like, and this will make a stronger image. So
Mhm.
it's not like I just read something and I go, I've got to do exactly what's on there and nothing else, and I can't add anything. Like if I horribly change something, or I wouldn't say horribly, if I dramatically change something, then
Mhm.
I'll actually go back and alter the text, and I'm like, this is a stronger idea
Do you ever throw it away and start over? You
all
said
the
you go
time,
back to a
all the
stronger idea
time.
all the time.
Yeah.
So you believe in drafts both in writing and in art,
Yes.
but you can't do a draft in a tattoo, right?
No.
Or maybe you
although
can. You
although you
can.
you do a sketch
A
before you do
sketch.
the
Yeah.
tattoo,
Yeah.
and I like some people like sketch on the spot, some people even freehand. I much prefer sketching it myself because what happens is I sketch it, and it's really great now. I can use iPad and use Create Space because it makes everything easier. So I will sketch it, and then I will like go over and revise it a couple times so it's exactly what I think is the most expressive, and then because it's still like a live thing, then I'll put it on them. If I have to, I'll go back to the iPad and I'll change it some more.
Do you ever dream things and then try to realize them?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah.
Okay, tell me one of your favorite dreams that you turned into something. If you can, that's the seventh embarrassing question. I'm just probing your mind, Dan. I want to see the way an artist thinks.
It's like kind of sitting down with the psychiatrist, and, but yeah, I don't know because I have a lot of like not to like say ill for me, but I've had like a lot of trauma in my life,
Mhm.
so there are like traumatic events that I will say will heavily influence me. Like for instance, like my wife died in a hit and run.
Mhm.
So, and I've had like dreams of like, of meeting up with her or going, where have you been all this time? I thought you were dead or whatever. And then I've also brought some of that into my books. Like I'll have characters that are tortured by the death of their wife.
Okay. Okay. Uh, that that's a that opens a giant hole that I need to get filled with some stuff here. All right. All right. Is there a difference in your writing world, in your art world, between feeling and emotion? Because let me explain what I'm trying to get to here. Words are just sort of a thin veneer over these things we feel, that we try to find words for. Like you're walking through the forest and you see a snake or a bear, and you don't say, "Oh my God, this bear makes me afraid." I mean, the hair stands up on the back of your neck. You get a shot of adrenaline, and you start to run, or to hide or something like that. To me, that's the deeper sort of limbic brain working that's giving you a signal: get the hell out of there as fast as you can. It's not saying, "Oh, that's a bear. I'm so afraid of bears." See, I mean, as a writer, I'm trying to figure out how to translate that feeling into words that still will be recognizable to other people, but won't be the same old hackneyed everyday words that we use to talk about fear and those kinds of things. I mean, I may have gone too far abroad there, but
No,
that's
well,
where my mind is.
I think, I mean, one thing that people like about my writing, and obviously I'm not Stephen King, so I don't have this massive fan base. But the feedback I have gotten is a lot of people that like that they can picture what I'm writing. I
Okay.
think that helps because I'm an artist, so like I visualize all of it, and then when I transcribe it, I kind of like bring into it what it would like. For instance, if the guy's wearing like a red tie, I would say because you can't just say red. I would say a light red or a crimson
Yeah,
or
yeah,
So
yeah.
I try like I add a little bit of just kind of naturally. In fact, when I first started writing, I was over describing stuff.
Mhm.
People say it's almost like I was trying to paint a picture with words.
Yeah.
And so I've scaled back on that because I think one, it disturbs the flow,
Mhm.
and two, you need a certain amount that the reader should be able to visualize himself. You shouldn't
Mhm.
spell every little detail out for him. Like,
Right.
hey, what color socks he's wearing and all that
Right.
sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I agree with that. I worked, I think, 3 or 4 times at Natalie Goldberg workshops, and she would say things like you just said. She said, "It's not a car, it's a Cadillac. It's not a cat, it's a white Cadillac. It's a white Cadillac convertible with red Naugahyde seats and a gold decal on it. And there's as much detail as you need to get the picture because stories are told with actions and images, right? Things you see and things you watch move. That's my sense. So the whole question of I used to call it writing school bloat. When they would just keep packing that stuff in there, just get deeper and deeper and deeper. I want to see the clearest image possible doing the most precise action possible. And that kind of precision takes takes a lot of work in the rewrite, I think.
No,
That's why
I think you're completely correct on that. I think one of the biggest things I learned from Stephen King was like anything that you don't absolutely need, take it out.
take
You
it out.
know, so
Yeah,
if this guy approaches you, and he's like a middle-aged man, wearing a suit with like dark hair, that's enough. You don't see him say, well, he had dark hair, but it was like this way it was cut, and then he's wearing this suit, but this suit was like this for the top and this
yeah,
for the
yeah,
tie and this for the
yeah,
pants. Yeah, you don't need all that. And not only does it serve the flow, but it's like it really does help when people visualize something
yeah,
so they
yeah,
kind of get something going. They get if you throw in all that stuff, so you try and make them visualize something else, it might throw them off.
yeah, yeah. I agree, and that's why I think that. Well, what you're talking about right there is what I call. I have a bunch of triplets that I work with. Like speed, depth, and clarity. Well, what do I mean by speed? What you just said. If it's not necessary, take it out because you want to have only the perfect number of words that will make the image explode so they can see it, they can visualize it. And then what is depth? In any scene you're writing, there's one thing happening and a bunch of things going on. So there's more than one thing going on in that moment. And then clarity, is the action clear? Can you see what they're doing? Is the image clear? Can you see what is on the page? So we're really in sync on that. Slightly different words, but the whole point is it clear enough to see? Does it move on the page? Does it have some feeling
Right? Can you
behind it?
visualize it? Yeah.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
And I
Well,
think sorry, let me
no, no,
interject
no.
one more thing. You might have you might have a very concise point of this, a very crystal clear one. So I remember like part of the reason why I started like over detailing. I mean, there were a number of reasons, but part of like one of the main inspirations for doing that is like as a kid when I checked stuff out from the library. I remember I really love like horror and sci-fi and like cosmic horror and stuff. Um, Not even like horror like slasher fucked up people,
Mm-hmm.
but like horror like like weird creatures and developments and all sorts of stuff. But when I read that, some like I remember reading a couple things where like they would talk about stuff like for instance it's a sci-fi thing and they're talking about like an alien world, an alien planet, where, but they don't describe anything, so you can't really visualize it, and you're
Right.
like it's a strange alien world, but like, yeah, I walked down the hallway and opened the door. They're like,
Yeah.
but what kind of hallway was it? Like, if it's a hallway on Jupiter, it's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
like way crazier looking
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
something in like Star Trek.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and then I was like, oh, so I got to describe everything. But then if you describe everything, that like you tip the scales too much to the other side.
Well,
So
see, what it seems to me is over description slows down the pace of the story. If you stop the action while you talk about the color of the guy's hair and whether he has a pinpoint in his ear and his
yeah,
chin is pointed, where's the story? Where's the impulse in the
right.
story? Where is it going? You got to get from beginning to end in some way. Now you don't have to turn it into a train wreck, but you can't let go of that speed. You got to have that impulse. The image or the metaphor that I use is you want to get your readers on a train and there are no stops. You don't ever want to stop to give them a chance to get off because they've closed that book and they'll never pick it up again if you're going too slow. Owners, you don't want to go so fast that they get dizzy from the speed. So my sense is we're talking about the same thing. But when you go to horror, I think you touched on what I was trying to get to earlier, the difference between feeling and emotion. Horror is something that raises the hair on the back of your neck. Oh, it scares the hell, but you don't think, oh, I'm scared. You just react to it. I think that's my purpose or my goal as a writer is to raise the hair on the back of my reader's neck in some way. Make
I think it's best if you react instead of like overthinking it. Because if you
yes,
overthink it, like lowers the temperament, So,
exactly.
but if you react to it, like you're in the moment and you want to keep like following the story.
Exactly, exactly. That's exactly what. And I think that is that train of emotion that comes out of the old brain. I'm glad you discussed tattooing in terms of physiology because I like to think about writing in terms of the cerebral structure, the structure of your brain. That limbic brain back there at the, base of the base of the brain is that's really a powerful part of it's as powerful as our thinking part, because that's what drives us, keeps the heart going, all that stuff. So there's this physiological substrate in good writing, I think, that excites people in the same way that seeing a bear in the woods or a snake in your garbage can excites you. Holy, what the hell is this? And so it's that deeper brain response that I try to get as close to as I can. And again, that's a well that I fall into a lot of times, and I come up dry, in the sense I just don't get it. But I try to get it as hard as I
What do
can.
you think of like as kind of a writing coach and advisor and so on? Like there are some people that are like they're not only pissers, but they're very much like, I refuse to do any editing. I refuse to do any like for material. I just kind of rant and like, they at least think that their writing is like good enough that by them ranting is still coherent and makes a coherent story.
Right.
And then there are people that plan stuff out like Alan Moore is famous for this, like when he did Watchmen he created a whole model, like he's from the UK, so he created a whole model of Manhattan. So when he could talk about one character and seeing another, he could say, "Okay, well, be from this corner to this corner," and he could plan it all out. So and like when he do comic books, he's still considered one of the best writers in comics ever. Like I consider him that, and what he would do is he's not an artist, but he would do like little sketches of every single scene and give it to the artist. So you kind of like micromanage the process. And
Yeah.
then you have some people that just like they go with the flow, and by the end might have very little to do with the beginning.
Yeah. Well, you just open up a whole, can of all kinds of, things here. I'll go back to kind of the beginning. The sense that I get is don't work with people who know less than you do. In other words, don't go to them for writing. All you'll get is a subjective response. If you're worried about do I have this right? Is this working? Is the character deep enough? Have I over described? Work with people who know what over description is, who can tell you about whether the character is working, whether there's a flaw, guilt, shame, doubt, all those things. Because if you just give it to a reader, and I'm not demeaning the reader, you got to have the reader, but if you just give it to a reader who says, "Oh, I really like it,"
Right.
well, that doesn't help me as a writer,
And that's
and
also one subjective take on it. So who
it,
knows?
exactly. And the second thing you got into was, what was it, Alan? Who was it? Alan? Who
Alan
that?
Moore.
Alan Moore, how he described it's almost like you're talking about a director putting it on a storyboard,
Right.
putting each little thing like
And
that.
that is kind of what it's like. Yeah.
That's not a bad technique for getting hold of story. You can see it. When I write, I have a technique I call the cut to, that we borrowed from the screenwriters. You say, cut to, instead of doing a slug line like you're writing a script, you say, cut to Bill sitting at a pawn shop, hawking his watch, cut to Sue and I'm making up silly things, but Sue at the kitchen chopping onions, cut to Billy, putting money in his piggy bank. See, but that's how you move through time and space, using that cut to, and it be a very good technique for getting the story to move through time and space. So those are the three things that I've felt in listening to you talk about this, but my big sense is, when I teach, I tell writers, I can't teach you how to write. What I can do is keep you writing until you learn how to write, and I can give you some techniques that I know have worked for me to help my writing get more visible, or visualized. Uh, End of rant.
No, I think yeah, I think that's true. And I think that applies to art too. It's like, you can't teach somebody to be an artist. I mean, whether it's like a writer or anything else, but I'll just talk about like a visual artist, like a painter or drawer, you know, um, you can't teach them how to develop a style. You can teach them to like, like for instance, I like it better when somebody has their own style and they render something in their own way, and they put like a slight twist on it. So you go, that's that person's work, as opposed to where they do like basically a photographic copy of something.
Well, isn't that the problem with AI? That
Yeah,
AI will
exactly. Yeah.
see. I mean, we won't get that. We won't get that depth in AI. I admit that I've tried some AI things just to see. I'd say,
See if it works.
give me a piece of Robert J. Ray's writing, and it will come back and say, because of intellectual property things, I cannot give you his exact words, but Robert Ray Ray is known as a novelist, da 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 dum,
Right.
so, and it's all potboiler stuff. Now, maybe at the deeper level of AI, there's something else going on. But when you mention the word develop a style, this artist does his or her own style, it applies to writing too.
Like
And
how are you gonna do McCormick as like AI?
exactly, exactly. Oh, I love the old call. What's the one where he's going through? I've forgotten the name of it. They're on a journey through the Southwest Blood Meridian.
Yeah,
That just, well, that's writing that sends chills up and down my spine, friend. I mean, I read that and I say, holy, well, how did he get there? How did he develop that style? You know,
but
AI can't
he
do.
just has such a flow that
Yes.
like one of my favorites right now is Neil Gaiman. And what Neil Gaiman does is like everything he takes, he kind of adds like his like you don't even see it if you're not in the industry, but he adds such like a flow and element and feel to everything. It's like it's almost like butter. Like it feels like it comes to life in your
Yeah.
hands when you read his stuff. And there are other people that can do the exact same material, but not make it,
Yeah.
like as eye catching as his stuff.
Yeah, yeah. But see, that gets to the question of, you know your own style. Do you know how you developed your own style? Can you trace it historically by looking at the work you've done from the past and seeing how it developed? In other words, does a style evolve through time for a writer or a graphic artist?
I think he should.
Oh, should.
I
You better
think,
hope to
yeah.
hell it does, right? Yeah.
Well, I think like and the thing is like some people you see it like up to a certain point and then they just kind of like give up. Like one of my favorite examples that is like Bernie Wrightson, who's like
Yeah.
an amazing artist. And you can
Mm,
see he just got better and better and better. And I'll bet he looked at some of the really strong artists around him or like legends of the genre. And then he did like an illustrated version of the novel Frankenstein,
mm,
and the illustrated is like to this day they blow everyone's mind. Like people are like, "Oh my god, he's so good," you
mhm.
know. But I remember meeting him at the convention years ago. He's dead now, but he was still alive at the convention when I met him. And I talked about that. I was like, "Oh man, I love your Frankenstein work." And he said when he did that, he realized that was the best he was ever going to do. And he just kind of gave up
Oh,
after that.
oh, that's a shame. That's a shame. Well,
So
that
even
kind of
his
self.
stuff where he's like it's kind of subpar for him is still better than most people's stuff. So he like stopped for like a year and then was like, oh well, I have a kid in college and I have to make money. So he started doing stuff and like I said, it was still better than the majority of people's stuff, but it was nowhere near his height.
Oh, wow. Well, see, that's the kind of self-limiting observation that kills a lot of really good writers too. They wind up. Let me back up one step. I have a bunch of novels and a bunch of stories out there, and my goal was never to repeat myself, which keeps me from writing genre. I can't write a mystery. I don't, I don't want to write a mystery. And so the point I think is you cannot allow the other world to trap you in self-imitation, which is
Right.
what your guy, he was, I forgot, I couldn't read the captioning. Who was it? The guy who did this?
Bernie, well, the guy who
Oh,
did what? Bernie
Bernie Will.
Wrightson is the artist that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, the problem there, you see, is that he let other people, let me back up. I keep going backwards. I think as soon as a writer or an artist gives something to somebody and they get a react and they say, did you like it? I think they've lost the game right there because what
Yeah.
they're asking is to be loved. And
Right.
sometimes your art has
They're
to be
asking for
so
feedback, but they shouldn't be
ex-
interested in feedback. They should be interested in whether
exactly.
they
Yes.
accomplish what they want to, not what other people's opinion is of it.
Yes,
Sorry, go
yes.
ahead.
As soon as you ask if they like it, you've lost the game
Right.
because what you're trying to get to do is to show them, and I have to use the word show. You said earlier, tell too much to show. My third level is to evoke it. Let me give you a story about why I think evoking is so important. My first short story was published in Carolina Quarterly way, way back, and I gave it to a woman to read. And so I said, "Well, you read it?" She says, "Oh, yes, it just reminded me of when I lived in Southern California in the orange groves, and I could hear the trains running through the groves at night, but we could never see them." And I said, "Well, you read it, so tell me about the woman in the story." It's just, "Oh, she's tall, she's blonde, she's wearing high heels, she's wearing a
Right.
white dress." There's not a word of description about the woman in the story, but it evoked this whole thing in her, you
Right,
see,
right.
which tells me that's more powerful than showing and telling.
So
And
maybe
so,
the feel of like everything going on around her made her visualize this person doing it.
yes, exactly. That's see the point here, I think, is that if you if you allow if you allow yourself to get trapped in the word like, then you can never fully develop that sense of evoking something beyond what's on the page. I think you want to evoke something in the viewer, in the reader that isn't exactly there, but it kind of makes them feel something deeper. See, I go back to this. As soon as I saw this, I knew this is the image I wanted to use for that cover because it evoked something in me. It evoked dark and light. It evoked the caring dark figure taking care of the character in the bed. I mean, just all kinds of things that it evoked in me. And I don't know what it does to other people, but the sense is I'm not trapped by whether they like it or not because he's trying to show me something beyond what is there. And again, I keep falling into these holes, Dan, these wells, and I keep coming up dry. But one of these days I'll get wet. So,
I think that you have to like what I just thought is like for instance with a character with like that was visualized having like blonde hair and something like you probably need something, whether obviously if you visualize a person there was something that made her grab on. It might have been something in the text or whatever, but like if you're like for instance like my girlfriend is Korean, so she'd probably visualize a person as being Korean. So it's possible that they could go, well, it didn't strike me as realistic because a Korean girl wouldn't do that. But like at no point did I say whether it was a Korean girl or like anybody else, whether it was a black girl, a white girl, whatever. I didn't say or Arab girl. I didn't say, but it's like if there's absolutely nothing for them to grab onto, like they might visualize it a way that goes different from the flow of the text.
sure, yeah. Well, I think that one of the things that, well, all of this really. Well, let me ask you a deep. Let me. This is the ninth embarrassing question. All right. When you create your characters, do you become the characters as you write? See, if you're an actor, you get a role and you have to immerse yourself in a Stanislavski method of the
Right, right.
miser. You immerse yourself in it and you bring your own experience into the character. So you get
You
them.
don't have to, but I'm a fan of people who do that.
Yeah, okay. This is what they say. Is if you're a writer, I say, Jesus, an actor's got it easy. She has to be one character.
It's
I got to
true.
be
Yeah,
nine
yeah. It's
characters.
true. It's
And they
true.
can't be cardboard. They got to be real guys, feeling stuff and doing stuff. And thinking stuff. Do you get into that character that way?
Well, often, I'll say two things. One, when I write a decent amount of stuff, I do in first person,
Hmm.
uh, and I don't do it like I'll kind of mix it up a little bit. Like some I'll do in first person, present tense, and then I won't switch it up in chapters, but like in a different chapter, it might be in first person, past tense. But by doing it in first person, it's like when I'm seeing it through the eyes of somebody, I kind of do me because I'm like, that's how I would visualize it.
Okay.
But Sometimes even stories what I'll do is I'll do like one chapter with one character in first person and one chapter with a different character in third person.
Hmm.
And often when I do some anybody in third person, if it's not like the protagonist, it's like that maybe it was the first person that was based off me. Then
Hmm.
what I do is I base it off of other people I know. And fortunately, I've been all around the world. So, like, I know people from, all different cultures, all
Hmm.
different ethnicities, all different everything. So, I try to base it as much on people I know, but I also ask for feedback. You know, like, I did a story about, like, the trenches of World War I. And I remember one feedback was like, well, you have letters in that. Those letters don't read to me as authentic for
Ah,
World War I.
okay,
I was
okay,
like, that's a good point. So I
yeah,
was like, how do I look up, the way people would write letters in World War I? And they're like, I don't know, Google World War I letters. And I did. I Googled World War I letters. I'm
hmm,
like, oh, this is the way that they talk. But
yeah.
yeah, that might
Well,
be a
let's
long
see.
answer to a short
No,
question.
no, no. That's see, that's picking up on the whole idea is you don't always keep just this single thing, right? You actually listen to the characters, you feel the characters, you try to get them on the page, and you did your research on the World War I, that kind of stuff. See, so you're actually not projecting yourself, you are incorporating that experience into the character that you're writing. I think that's what I'm hearing,
Yeah, no,
right?
that's what I try to do. And, obviously, different people from different eras have different mindsets, like different
Correct.
priorities, different ways of thinking, different everything. So, like, I try to stay as close to something I've had direct experience with
Yes.
as
Okay.
possible because I don't want to get stuff wrong.
Hmm.
So when I describe a character from like a different era or something, I try to do a little bit less of a deep dive into them personally and more into like everything that's occurring around them,
Hmm.
because I'm not as familiar with like a World War II veteran from Paris.
Right. Yeah. Well, you say something that's very interesting about, well, everything you've said is interesting, so I don't want you to get a swelled head about that, but this idea of, uh, well, I worked for a while with a screenwriter who used to say, I want my students to read the plays, the classic plays. And I said, well, why? He says, so they can know what it feels like to have great words in their mouth. you know, and that got me to realizing that what I do when I teach now is I have the writers read the work aloud. I have them read it, I have someone else read it, I have some because
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, and that's one thing I've heard, from classes I've taken, seminars I've taken later on. It's like read it out loud
mhm,
because
mhm,
and one thing you learn like with drawing and with illustration is like take the image, hold it up to a mirror and look at
mhm.
it.
Oh,
So
oh, that's very interesting. Again, the physiological aspect of perception can change what you see from left to right, right?
oh
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
you know, yeah,
And,
that's
and,
great.
and by holding it up to a mirror, you often immediately see flaws in it. But yeah, like reading it out loud, the same thing. You immediately see flaws in it.
Yes, yeah,
And I found out, the importance definitely of having, beta readers and listening to their feedback, and reading it out loud helps. There's a lot of stuff that like our inputs, all that stuff helps. It's not like you have to take stuff 100%, but you have to you need to listen and consider it, even if
yes,
if you're like
yes,
it's not relevant. You need to at least, you know,
yeah.
you
I
at
kind
least
of,
need to
yeah,
compare it and go, is it relevant? Why isn't it relevant? And go through a little bit more complex analysis.
yeah. One of the things that I really like to get the writers to do is I tell them, look, if the words don't fit in your mouth, they won't fit in your reader's ear.
Right.
That you just got to believe that. So the listening is as important as the speaking. And once you get that loop going, we get what we call interactive rewriting. Like they'll read and somebody said, but that word doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with these words. So you have to go back and I think, well, if you change those words, I'll tell you the story in a minute. If you change those words, then you have to go back and read the whole thing to see if it changed the piece at all. And that goes back to when Joyce wrote Ulysses, he's sent it out, of course. And this guy wrote him back and said, Mr. Joyce, on page something of Ulysses, you say this about ships, and that's wrong. And Joyce, Joyce goes back and he looks at it and he writes the guy back and says, "Sir, if I change that, I have to change the whole novel." And that's what I'm trying to get to with the writers, say, look, you know, this is a process of trying to find the words that you can say that will go into the reader's mind and create an image. See, your physiological discourse on tattoos is directly related to this thing about how images and action get into the brain. How how can you read one of your stories where something happens and somebody comes back and say, "Oh, I love that scene where da 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 da." How did that get into their brain? I mean, it's physiology, it's cerebral work. And I'm still puzzling that through. I try to read a lot of neuroscience and neurologists because Eric Kandel, in his book, The Age of Insight, says artists just have to start paying more attention to the neurosciences because it's all about the brain. It's all about the brain.
Well, it's strange. It's like going with that. It's like strange. Like I've noticed this in the tattoo world. So if I do like tattoo this like a super complex like half sleeve, I put hours and hours into it. You know, then I don't get as much like I don't get as many eyes on it as if I do like a Homer Simpson. Because people are like, "Oh, Homer Simpson, I recognize him." So
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's kind of what grabs you. It's like they're amazing musicians that they're kind of struggling in the trenches. Meanwhile, you have bands like Power Man 5000 that were like one hit wonders that made like $5 million because right place, right time, caught the zeitgeist, and boom, they blew up.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Well, let me ask you another question. I'm full of questions today. When you're writing, do you write by hand? Do you write on a computer? Do you write fast or do you write slow? That's four questions.
Well, this is my process. Is I tend to I have notes on my computer or on my phone
Okay.
rather, and so I'll write down all the notes, and then I'll have like a rough storyline, but with all the notes, as reference towards the storyline. Then I start to write the story, and as I'm writing the story, if everything is just like it's just flowing, it could be 3 hours. If I reach a roadblock and I'm not sure exactly where I should progress, I mean, it could be, 5 minutes later or like an hour and a half later. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to force it. I know there are a lot of authors that like are a fan of like just get everything down, you can edit it later. I don't think like that. So what I found going and doing some physical activity gets all the endorphins rushing through the brain, and you think of stuff. So like I'll go for a run or I'll go for a bike ride or something like that. And by the end of that run of the bike ride, I know the next development.
Okay. So that raises two questions. And first, I think as Raymond Chandler said, that when I'm writing fast, it feels like the words are pushing me. When I'm writing slow, it's like I'm pushing the words. You
I
know,
think that's yeah.
is
I think it's so
that boy? I
true. Yeah.
felt that right away. See, and this whole idea about physical activity and the endorphins and the chemistry of the body as an aspect of writing. A lot of writers ignore that. You know,
They do.
and
Yeah.
to their detriment. Because endorphins are really powerful things. This
Well,
your
if you see
body's.
like a lot of people, they kind of like use like almost like replacements for that without really realizing what's going on. Like plenty of writers have had like coke problems at one point, or like
Mhm.
smoking problems, or like all sorts of stuff. So they use like drugs to try and like basically do the same thing endorphins would do for you.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think those bring a lot of like side effects.
right.
You know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that I really enjoy about writing is I'm writing along, writing, and I feel myself sort of, uh, I want to say it as without sounding crazy, sort of levitating. You know what I mean? I feel light. It's like this thing is happening, and it's it's sort of like being transported to another state of mind. You know what I mean? I mean, you're
No,
writing
yeah,
a lot.
I agree with that. Yeah, it does
Yeah,
feel like that. You know,
yeah, and it just feels good, and then I go back and I read it and I say, oh well, I'll rewrite this, but the fact is that I've gotten it down. It's on the page. I can read it aloud. I can feel the rhythm. Let me ask you a question about rhythm. This is my own, that's question 15. It's in the book of questions as 15. All right. Do you think in writing rhythm is as important as syntax?
yes,
Okay. Because rhythm is, when we're writing, we're kind of writing music. I
right.
feel that and maybe that's why I feel this.
I think the best books grab you because of how well they flow, not just
Okay.
because of how well there is, semantically, but like how well they flow.
Yes, yes. That's exactly the way I feel, That's why I tell the writers, don't give your reader a chance to put the book down. By definition, that's a page turner. And it
Right.
doesn't have to be a detective thriller or it can be just good writing. You just want to feel you want to see the next image, you want to feel the next thing. To me
Well,
that's
I feel that like some of the people have gone like Richard Matheson is great at that. He's like great at like building up and then punchline. You don't feel like there's like a bunch of extra skin or whatever. You feel it's like meat and bones. But
yeah.
I think you see the regression with someone like Neil Gaiman. Like he had great stories early on, but that polish and flow wasn't there. And then
Hmm.
later on, he has like equally as good stories, but he just tells them better.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's one of the things that I find is I know a lot of writers who have great ideas, but they haven't taken the time to acquire the techniques to render those ideas into good, clear, fast words. Do
Right.
you see that? Do you see that as I won't call it a problem, but it's a learning curve. A lot of writers think because I speak English, I can write a story, and they don't come to the conclusion that, wait a minute, a piece of fiction is not just a bunch of words. It's not 120 pages. It's not, it's there's something there that's got a structure and a form and all this kind of stuff. And until they learn, you've been talking form and technique all the way through this thing. No, I mean you have. See, you've acquired a number of techniques that allow you to sit down, have an outline, have ideas, start writing, do this. That's all technique, on how to render it. And so what I tell writers is acquire the techniques until the techniques become as powerful as your ideas. Then you can render all that into fiction or story or whatever you want that will engage the reader and take them to a journey that they've not been on before. Well, look, Dan, I don't know how long you can run on this, but let me tell you, this has been just a really great conversation, artist to artist.
Yeah,
You
thank
know,
you. And
been really.
I appreciate it. And I think what I told you is like I interview a lot of like writers, but
Hmm.
I feel like they would really get they'd really it'd be a great advantage for them if they got somebody who like talked to them a little bit about the technique of writing and so on. And I understand you do some like what is it like you do seminars, you do like
Yeah, yeah, I do a thing called, well, it's a master. Well, here's what I've learned in the past few years. I wrote 20 of my books and I did not use a publicist at all. Some of them fell down, some of them didn't. They did okay. For Man Alone, I decided to use a publicist for the very first time because I have a saying, I live on 12th Avenue in Seattle, and I say, how in the hell do I get off 12th Avenue? I mean, you probably have some of the same issues. Well, the publicist, by working with the publicist, she showed me how to use, how to network in a broader scale, how to do this. And she found out that I was actually doing a Tuesday afternoon writing class with a bunch of writers. And she says, why don't you turn it into a master class and open it up to people, on the thing, on a broader scale. So I did, and we retitled it Masterclass in Interactive Rewriting, and that's all it focuses on is rewriting. And I think there are 22 people have signed up for it. I had 8 people yesterday, and so it's this ongoing thing where I try to cultivate. No, put it this way, Dan, I try never to hurt another writer. Okay. I mean, I do not believe in critique. I believe you call it feedback. I call it comments, stuff like that. The idea is to make good writing better, to help writers find their voice. If you can tell me what voice is, we could find it, but the idea then is to help everybody I can by sharing with them the techniques that I have learned in 30 years of writing, you know, and that makes me feel really good to know that other writers see the value of that. And that's what the master class is all about, is showing them
I
how to,
think that is instructive. I think that is neat. I think that approach is like my favorite approach. I remember my art teacher when I went to art school would say this way he would say with anything. Like if you did like a painting or a drawing or whatever, he come first he would tell you what he likes about it. You
Mhm.
go, oh, I like the way you did this. I like the way you did this. And then you go, oh, but you need to work on this. So
Yes.
by first telling you what you did, what you did that he likes, he's first complimenting you, and then when he tells yourself, you almost feel like you let him down a little bit, and you need to work on it, as
Yeah.
opposed to he's
Yeah.
just tearing it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I use that same technique in the writing. I will look at a piece of work that somebody has done and I say, well, I talk a lot about the poetics of prose. I say, well, here you got really good rhythm. You've got alternating length in your sentences. You're using a couple rhetorical devices here, and that makes it dance. So you've got dancing and singing as well as the flow of the words. On the other hand, you used a bunch of ly adverbs, and I don't really like ly adverbs. So why not? Why don't you like L? Well, because ly adverbs, you're telling me what to feel instead of showing me something. So take out
I think
that.
it was in Stephen King's seminar about like some he hates.
Yeah. Well, they used to call, I think the joke was that they called who wrote the Harry Potter series, whatever her name is, they
Rolling,
called
J.K.
uh,
Rowling, yeah.
the queen of the adverbs, they call. But
Well, she
when
is a billionaire though, so she did something right.
yeah, well, the point here that I'm trying to make with my students is, look, this part is good, this part needs work, which is what you just said. Your art teacher told you, I like this part. And I'm learning not to use the word like, but I'm saying, Jessica, this part is very strong. This
Yeah,
is this
no,
is
that's good
strong
though.
writing.
Yeah,
You see, instead of like, because that makes it too subjective. But
that's
if I can
true.
say
Yeah,
this is strong and here's why it's strong, because you're doing
I think
this.
strong also resonates a little better. You're like, oh wow, it's strong. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Eh,
Oh wow, it's strong. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, Well, so anyway, that's what I do. And I taught in the screenwriting program for a while. I taught novel and memoir and poetry and stuff like that. So I've tried to make my life as meaningful as I can in terms of helping other writers find their way through the forest. And it's a big goddamn forest out there,
It is.
you
Yeah.
know, so many. So okay, well,
All right, man.
our
So, how can people see your seminars? How can they get a hold of you? How can they, how can they, indulge in the stuff that you're offering?
okay, what I have, my webmaster is a woman named Sarah Gronostowski or Ziva, and she has rebuilt my website with a it's called it's jackremick.com. Go on to jackremick.com, and there's a registration form on there that they can register for the workshop. And the way it works is they will register, we'll get an email that says they're on it, and then they'll get an automatic email telling every Tuesday they'll get an email reminding them, just like you did with your link today, that they can, come on and do it. And I try to do two things on the workshop. I try to work with writers who have been there before, who are bringing something back, because I really focus on the rewrite, rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it until it just flows like hot sand, you know. And then I have the people who've just signed up send me a piece of writing and we work that too. So we get the double experience of the writer who's already been through the process and has reacted to it, and the writer who's just coming into the process and is learning some of the techniques.
Okay, awesome. That's mainly your website. Like, if you want to check into the stuff, you'd like to go to your website and contact you.
Yeah, yeah, they can contact me there at jackremick.com. That's all they have to type in, and it'll take them right. It's Remick, Remick. Yeah, and they will. Um, yeah, that's it. You know, and
Do you have any social media links that you want people to check
yeah, well,
out?
I'm on Facebook. Well, this is something that the publicist has gotten me to think about. Uh, I've got to expand my social media footprint. You know, you mentioned TikTok and Instagram and other those kinds of. I'm an old guy, Dan. You said back in your childhood you didn't have social media. We didn't even have computers, my friend. We
We
had
didn't. I didn't either. Like
typewriters and dial telephones are my world.
that's what we had. Like, how
Yeah,
old are you?
I'm not going to. Oh, I'm 83.
All right, I'm 51.
Oh,
So
you are? Okay. You
yeah,
don't look a day over 51.
yeah. But
All right. Well, look, you know, I really appreciate this. So the question that in my mind now is, as I start to use the publicist more, her name is Amanda Stubbert. She's very good. Uh, she's helping guide me through the forest of the social media, and I'm learning how to put things on Facebook, on YouTube. How maybe one of these days I'll actually do TikTok, but I don't know if I will. Do you do TikTok?
yeah, yeah. But I figure as an artist, I should try to get my stuff across as many platforms as humanly
Right.
possible.
Yeah. Well, the visual, see, that's the thing, the visual artist, and I'm not gonna insult you here, but you guys have got it easy. You hold it up and say, "Here's my picture. Look at my picture."
Yeah,
And I
man.
say, "Here's my book. Read my book." And they say, "Screw you, Jack. We don't have time." But
Well,
see, they
that's
can't
true.
unsee your picture. I mean, your painting, your tattoo. They can't unsee that because their brain just soaks it up. So anyway,
Well,
I think,
when I would do a promo for my book, I like make a little video. I have a video editing app, and I'll make a little video and I'll put like artwork and all sorts of stuff in there. So yeah, the visuals have grasped people.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what the publicist wants me to do. I did one reading of the piece from Man Alone. I did an audio book for Man Alone. I'm trying to, in my old age, I'm trying to expand my social media footprint, as best I can. So we'll see what happens. This,
Okay, well, everyone should definitely check out the website. I think you have a lot to offer as far as like techniques for writing and stuff. Like, I think people should really pay attention to that stuff more than they do. Like, I think there's so many competing voices in social
oh
media
yeah,
now that
yeah,
people
yeah,
get easily distracted and think that like everyone's told like we're in this era where everyone's told they're the greatest for anything they do.
yeah.
And I'm sorry, that's just not the case. It's like you can always learn to get better.
That's right. Well, I think that's the whole purpose of my interactive rewriting workshop or masterclass is I never say this is bad. I say this is, and I'm starting to use that word strong. This is strong, and here's why, but this can be made better.
Right.
And once I start in on that process, then the changes that we make on the page, the writers say, "Oh, I see. Now I see why. Now I can understand, what's going on." And I say, well, dialogue is really not just words in quotation marks. Dialogue reveals character, tells us something about the character you
True.
know
It helps the story progress. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
that's right, that's right. So there are all those are techniques. I try to help writers discover who they are as writers, and so far I've had only one person come to the workshop and then say, I don't want to be here anymore. And he happened to be an Australian, who spoke with a strange accent, and I couldn't understand him. No, I'm joking. So I'm glad he's gone. Okay.
Well, you
Okay.
always get that. You always get haters, but all right,
Yeah.
man. Well, thank you very much for this. Is your main link right now your website? Is there you should look at?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook, Jack Remick on, they can find me on Facebook. The website is the main thing that we're working on now to try to expand both the content and the reach. So, there's there list all of my books are listed on there. I have some poetry recordings that I've put on there. I used to work with a group called the Seattle 5+1. We were a performance group, and we put out a book called Seattle 5+1, an anthology of all our work. Um, so my experience is there, but I have to find ways to get it out. And um, I'm not 100% convinced that it makes any difference. Talking to you is far more informative and real to me than me, splashing my books all over the internet. I mean, this is one to one. This is mind to mind to me. This is artist to artist. This is technique to technique. This is, sharing the building of the art to me is far more important.
Yeah, no,
And then,
I definitely appreciate conversation more than anything else. It's just, unfortunately, it's like, maybe cashes, maybe it doesn't. You really don't know these days.
yeah, yeah. Well, the world is getting more complex all the time. I just slammed a little piece into this novel that I'm writing now. Uh, let me just read it to you. Have a minute? Let
Yeah.
me just. It's just a couple lines. All right. Let's see. Format where he says this. Crap. Let's see. Uh, Border. Okay. Says. Oh yeah. Crap. Again, let me find it. I'm sorry to slow this down. See, I'm being a bad writer here. All right. Okay, what could go wrong has already gone wrong. Kill rates are up, disease rates are spiking, water levels rising. Christian nationalists calling themselves the army of God are on guard duty at the border. Schools are failing. Wait, let me think. Oh yes, Putin is rattling his nuclear sword. Do you have anything else I can add? you know, that's the shape the world's in, and I'm just kind of, anyway. Okay.
Wait, well, is that something that's going to be out on Amazon or is it already out on
Yeah, yeah,
Amazon?
it's on. All my stuff's on Amazon. This new book is, oh, I've written, I know your focus is on, you told me in one of our notes it was in horror and, sci-fi and stuff like that. And I have three books that are, well, Terminal Weird, which was my first collection of short stories. All right. It's kind of a crazy book. It's not anything you'd recognize. It is more akin to some of the earlier stuff you were talking about, in your work. Anyway, and then Citadel is pure science fiction. You know, uh, where are we going with that? All of those are on all of those are on Amazon, and this new piece is unlike anything I've ever written because I go back to that original thing that I try not to imitate myself. And I have good friends. One of my writing partners, Bob Ray, is a mystery novelist. He writes, lots of novels, mystery novels. A lot of my students write mystery novels. I have nothing against genre, but I'm not anxious to do that. I want to, God damn it, I want to get off 12th Avenue in my own way. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, thanks, man. Thanks for doing this. I think people should definitely check out, especially like they should buy your stuff, but they should especially check out like what you have to teach them about writing because I think we covered some very important stuff here.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, very good then, Dan. Thank you so much for being patient. I'm sorry that we got screwed up on time, but that's, artists are not always here, they're often somewhere else.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
But
good. I hope we'll talk again later, and good luck with your art and your writing and everything, and I'll see you someday.
thanks
All
very
right.
much, man.